Good evening. Welcome to the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, Wednesday, April 25th, 2018. We'll begin with approval of the minutes from April 11th.
So moved.
Second?
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, thank you. Item 2, correspondence. Is there any correspondence from staff?
Nothing from staff this evening.
I'm trying to remember if I had any, but I'll talk about it later maybe with, yeah, okay. So we move on to item 3, Transportation Commission meeting report from Joel.
The Transportation Commission met 2 weeks ago. The main item of interest was the discussion, also involving the smart transit people,
Right.
of alternative changes in the routing of the bus system. There are a number of, there's several different alternatives under consideration. Currently, we have 2 routes. Slightly modifying the routing of the 2 routes is a possibility. Going from 2 routes to 3 routes is a possibility. There is discussion of the possibility of sort of moving the rendezvous point where the various buses all stop, where people can get off one bus and get on another bus, a little bit to the west from the current transit center onto campus. There would be some advantages to that, the discussion of what it would need for infrastructure. There's some disadvantages that some of the changes would make the routes a little bit longer, and with every half hour running of the buses, things get a little bit tight, and any elongation of the routes makes problems, and that would be one of the problems of moving further into campus. There is some particular changes of which streets the routes run on, which there's a desire to get further up into the north central Rodeo Drive, North Polk area, which is underserved. There's some regrets that we haven't served further out toward the Good Samaritan area. There's perceived need to get further down toward the student apartments. What are they called down?
Campus Crest.
Campus Crest. There is a possible rerouting of the south route, staying with 2 routes, but rerouting the south route to serve the Campus Crest area. Some of that depends on some roads that have down in that area that haven't been built yet, but are projected to be built soon. So basically, the discussion was fairly free-for-all in terms of possibilities that are under consideration. There will be further data collected by the Smart Transit, including a survey of users and perhaps a method for reaching out to non-users, public input. The Transportation Commission was in favor of the routes which would reach down toward Campus Crest, The commission was a bit regretful that we weren't reaching further up into the North Polk region. And we were suggesting that the move toward a rendezvous point further into campus sort of be put off for a while until we see exactly what can be done within the time constraints of the half-hour repeat route. Incidentally, there are a number, especially the north route, a number of loops which would be only served on an hour. On an hour, one would do this loop, and on the half hour, we'd do that loop. That seems to be less true in the proposed south route. So it's all under consideration. The discussion is ongoing. We'll hear more about it, and there will be public involvement. But the routes are up for discussion.
Great, thank you. So I have a question in terms of moving farther into campus. Are they going back to where it used to be, which would be in front of the bookstore, kind of, or in that right across from
I
Bruce Pittman Center?
think the proposed the place where three buses could
Line up, because that was a place we used to.
could be simultaneously is a little bit further south of that. There's some proposed. There's a one-way street that might possibly get changed and so on if that happened. But it's the problem with that is it bumps up against the time schedule for doing a half-hour run. We had one of our ambitious members of the commission who had been out there running the routes and 26 minutes, 27 minutes. not much time for a driver to take a rest.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely.
Or not much chance for recovering from
or stay on schedule very easily.
one of the things that might happen on a route.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for the update. Okay. Any questions for Joel? All right, item 4, public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission regarding matters that aren't before us or on the agenda, but there is no one in the audience, but just a reminder for people who might be listening about that opportunity. Item 5 is the fiscal year 2019 budget. That'll be...
So we talked about this last time. We had a pretty long discussion, but failed to vote on approving of our FY19 budget. So I just brought that back to.
Okay.
Yeah, and that.
I was hoping you were going to give us some more money.
Yeah. City council gives us money, so Ann's your person right here. We can request, however much we want, but in the past we've historically requested $1,500 just for professional development activities, and so I had just kept it, status quo, but we can certainly.
So you're looking for a motion?
Could I ask a question first? If we were to approve the $1,500, which I recognize has been kind of the traditional budget, but we find something that would be of value, can we come back and revisit some additional funds? Is that a possibility, or?
Typically not. I mean, the funds would have to come from another, budget item within the budget.
Within our
City's
budget or
Within the
city's
budget.
but there's a general fund that, there's generally some additional monies available for appropriate activities that are, as I recall. So
I was going to have the same question, really. If we ended up bringing in a speaker that probably is going to cost more than $1,500, what other sources could we draw from? Are there grant possibilities, or are there? And so probably the answer is we'd have to be looking at other sources. Yes.
Traditionally, how has the $1,500 budget worked, say, in the last 5 years? Has it been spent? Has it got to the last month and, well, we better spend it, or it's going away? what happens
That's a good question. And
if
Mike,
we
I don't
only
know how to
use $1,000? Can we only apply for, you know?
It typically in the past, we haven't used it on a whole lot of professional development opportunities. We've just used it for, you know, a commissioner's term has expired and they don't want to renew. And so we've given, you know, gifts and name plaques, you know, for commissioners. It's usually things like that we spend it on. I don't know, and, you know, open houses, sometimes we'll use it for just materials and food and beverage, you know, for open houses. If we have some, which we'll probably have for the comp plan coming up.
Right, we'll have a couple of
So-
But we do have community development has a line item for that as well, and so, you know.
So
that's-
historically, it has been sufficient to do what we are doing as a commission?
Yeah, we've usually had a lot of money left over, and that money just goes back into the general fund, and it doesn't roll over from year to year. So every year, we request 1,500, we spend however much, you know, and the remainder just goes back into the general fund is typically the way it works.
Because in a
So-
perfect world would be to, and I'm new at this, so slap me if I'm wrong, we need to have more professional training, more opportunities to go listen to speakers. If those things were to transpire over this 2019, then in 2020, we better figure out how to apply for more funding. You know, my thought is, there again, I'm new, this would be very much sufficient for the 2019, but plans ought to be put in place to utilize more of these other things, and maybe the next budget cycle apply for more funding.
Okay, two things. One, you had said last time, if we bring a speaker in, is likely to have an interest with more than one commission,
Right.
so we could partner. And the other thing is my impression, because I'm also new, and I haven't worked with the budget, but my impression is if you haven't spent your funds very much in the past, they're not
Right.
going to be likely to give you even more money
Yeah.
that you haven't been spending in the
Right about
past.
that.
So,
Right.
you know,
We just really, I mean, other commissions I've served on use the budget pretty much, but in this case, it's, you know, I have to say I haven't kept, I mean, I've been chair a couple of years, but we don't seem to burn through the cash.
I
So-
don't think my other commission
But,
does
you know, one
either.
thing we could do, except I'm not sure where we would store it, is think of also a library, accumulating a library of materials, books or something that have to do with whatever issues we're dealing with, that exhibit innovative planning approaches, or, I mean, that would be one idea, and so we can think of some others. But anyways, it sounds like we'll just go for broke. Is that what, does somebody want to make a motion on to that effect, or maybe we already did? Yes.
Well, I would move that we request the 1,500 budget. If we come up with that's the end of the motion. But if we come up with a wonderful speaker or other purpose, which is going to require more, then we figure out how to deal with it.
We find the resources.
And then the next year, you have grounds for asking for more money.
Right.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Abstention? Nope. All right. So, thank you for that. Item 6, PUD-based densities for zoning districts.
It's interesting.
Yeah, I'm eager to hear what this is.
Well, it's rather simple. We just, so we had a inquiry from a property owner in a neighborhood business zone that was looking for, you know, doing a PUD as part, and that the neighborhood business zone was a little over 2 acres in size, undeveloped, and was looking at doing a PUD. And we ended up discovering that there are certain zones that aren't listed for the base, you know, don't have a base density listed within those zones. But I'll quickly go through kind of our section on residential PUD density. We have a number of requirements, can't exceed the density established within this section. The permitted number of dwelling units shall be the sum of the base density and any bonus density multiplied by the total acreage of the PUD. Total acreage of the PUD shall include any area dedicated to the public or preserved as public open space, public easement, so pretty much the net density or the net area of the property. And then calculating the PUD residential density, any fraction shall not be permitted as a dwelling unit. So that was kind of the entry. And we have the base density for the zoning district shall be as follows. And so, this is all residential, and we just have these zones listed. It's all the residential zones, so ag forest all the way through R4. And then we have a couple of commercial zones listed as well, motor business and general business. But we leave out a number of zoning districts. So we have residential office, neighborhood business, RTO, so Alturas Technology Park, which we're, probably wouldn't see any PDs in there anyway, but, there could be the possibility. I doubt we even allow residential in RTO, so, that wouldn't necessarily be an issue. Central business, industrial, and urban mixed commercial. And I think at the time, we had done those code amendments in order to incorporate more residential and commercial zones. And so I think that was part of the, probably the reason why we didn't have it within these zones. And we just discovered it when, somebody had inquired as to what what base density they'd be restricted to in those zones. And so we started, we thought that the cleanest approach was just to go in and add those base densities in the PUD section instead of try to make a comparison which might not be the best legal standing to be able to do so. And so there, no rush really on their project, but they're just in the preliminary stages of looking at a small PUD, and just wanted to go back and look at incorporating those missing base densities for those zones, and it's really that simple.
I guess my question is, or perhaps my memory is that we really hadn't anticipated residential uses within a neighborhood business. And I guess it's a question in my mind as to whether residential PUD is an appropriate use of a neighborhood business zone.
Well, I think it would be more of a mixed use.
Second story.
It'd be more of a mixed use development that went through the PUD, and so it'd be some commercial and then possibly residential above, tied in with more of maybe a small unit residential detached development that are on the same piece. And so, when we amended the code a couple years ago to include more residential, we already allow pretty much residential, within that zone, but it has to be pretty much behind commercial, above or behind. And so we had, pretty much created, thinking that it'd be more of a transition, neighborhood business, usually have that right up against a single family, residential neighborhood, or maybe it's two family. Duplex or townhome neighborhood, and so it'd be kind of a good transition if you had more of a commercial complex with apartments above or behind. It's more multifamily transitioning into the neighborhoods that surround it. And so that was kind of the thought at the time when we added residential to that zone.
I guess further thinking about it, I'm wondering whether there ought to be some restrictions or descriptions or whatever that do essentially what you're describing, as opposed to simply allowing residential PUDs without there being mixed use in neighborhood business. neighborhood business is a kind of a special zone.
Could it be
It's-
a percentage
Yeah,
of the total development that is allowed to be residential
Yeah.
within a PUD instead of,
Yeah.
and make it more defined, or that would be one tool? If it 25% of the,
Yeah.
or something like that. I'm not sure what feels right or would seem right or proves to be right, but.
the neighborhood business we've generally thought of as being a sort of a necessary intrusion into residential, where it's useful to have certain types of businesses in close proximity to residential areas.
But it does offer another housing type
Yeah.
to have that second story available
Yeah,
for
well,
apartments
that-
or accessories.
Yeah.
I mean, smaller units and.
I like that, but I guess I want to be sure that that's what might happen, rather than
So
a purely residential PUD in an area that we have designated as appropriate for neighborhood-friendly businesses.
Right. No, I see what your concern is, but stopping short of prohibiting it, it
Yeah.
seems like, finding a way to create the flexibility to have it as a component, but with a baseline of neighborhood development. And how that happens, I don't know. It's up to the magic of Mike.
One of the other complications is RTO is listed as a missing zone, but RTO specifically prohibits
it.
residents.
Right.
There was some talk about changing that because it complicated the development of Alturas at one point in time. But I don't know if you just exclude that one from any kind of base density at all, since there's no, if we're talking about residential base density, then RTO isn't even in the mix, at least based on the current
Right, that's a
current
good point.
ordinance.
Other comments on?
Well, I guess that leads me, would we need to establish a base density for each one of these zoning districts?
I don't think so. I mean, we would, I think it's just looking at maybe the ones that would make sense. RO, neighborhood business, possibly urban mixed commercial. I don't know that, central business, we already allow most mixed uses.
Right,
And so I
right.
don't know that we would, see a PUD.
Right.
What you would need to go through a PUD
Right.
downtown to do.
Yeah.
And industrial, it's really meant to be industrial. We did allow the flexibility of having one unit, so like a live-work situation, but it's not really intended for a
Right.
residential development. It's industrial.
Yeah.
So, I think we would just go in, and I was just giving an example of the ones we don't have there, but thinking of the ones that we'd probably want, it'd just be a handful of the ones that I've got listed there. But I think that your concern, Joel, with the mixed use, I mean, we've got all these come to the commission, so the commission will review these. We have relevant criteria that require the PUDs to be consistent with the comp plan, things of that nature. And the comp plan is almost always going to say that this area needs to be more of a mixed use area with pocket commercial development. And so I think you have a mechanism there to make a decision that if you have one that comes to you and there's no commercial incorporated into it, that it probably wouldn't meet the intent of the comp plan for that proposal. So
I agree, but I would really hate to have a proposal get to that point to say we don't like it.
yeah. Well, I can go back and look through and see where it would be appropriate
Yeah.
and see if I,
Yeah.
can work something like that in
Yeah,
there.
the question, I guess my question is whether it's possible to, along with putting in a base density number, putting in some standards beyond just the comp plan that say it has to be has to be mixed use. And
Yeah, I can certainly,
And it's almost like
fit that in
the
there
residential
somewhere.
is auxiliary or accessory to the main use in a couple
Yeah.
of those, and it's sort of reiterating that in some way.
And
Yeah.
the same is true in RO. Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
Question.
yes.
So if you were to have a second story, that would be a 50% increase, correct?
If you did a
If you did a full second
100%,
story,
yeah.
would you do a third story? Then you would, I mean, how are you gonna pick a number? How do you pick a number?
for a percentage of,
A percentage or something?
I think we probably wouldn't, put ourselves into a corner with a
Yeah.
number and probably leave it open to, a statement about how neighborhood business should incorporate commercial development in every PUD project. And so
Sounds good.
we'd probably leave it open-ended like that, but still say that it should have some commercial component to the PUD. Last thing we want to do is put ourselves into
In
a
a
box,
box, yeah.
So, I think that that's probably, just off the top of my head, the way we, think
Yeah,
about
that makes
approaching it. But I could go through here and see where it'd be appropriate, and then we could come back
Yeah.
and talk about it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Well, I can certainly see possible examples that would be entirely consistent. I just don't want to see it become a subterfuge
But you want
around
it to
the
be a
neighborhood business
Yeah, you want it to be a
purpose.
secondary use rather
Yeah.
than a primary use, and maybe it's just the wording rather than the numbers that define that. So,
Mhm.
Okay, all right. I will see what I can do, and then we'll bring that back.
okay. Anything else on density?
Not on the PUD, yeah.
Okay. Item 7 is rural lot access requirements. And this has to do with the flagpoles.
Okay. So we have, within Chapter 6, we have access to lots and buildings, and we have a requirement that every lot in town has to have some type of frontage on a public street right away, other than an alley, and we define 40 feet as that distance. And then we have some exceptions down below that. So lots on cul-de-sacs and vehicle turnarounds, we allow you to go down to 20 feet. So if you have, given the limited frontage on cul-de-sacs, and then we usually apply that to curves. So if the street makes a 90-degree curve, we would, usually apply that standard as well to those lots and allow you to go down to 20. And then we have our flag lot standard that lets you go all the way down to 20 as well. And you don't have to be on a cul-de-sac or a curve. You can just be on a regular straight section of the street. But the flagpole lot it has to be a minimum of 20, and it can't exceed 150 feet in length. And so really the intent of the 150 is I think it was first derived from fire truck turnaround requirements. So once you, in the fire code, drive a fire truck past 150 feet, you're required to provide some type of fire truck turnaround. And in town, it just becomes a challenge with doing that on a regular sized lot. It's almost impossible to be able to do that. So that's what we ended up with. We've had that standard for as long as I've been here, and I think well before I was here, and it's worked. I thought it's worked fairly well in town. It gets you 150 feet and allows the density to be able to create a lot and kind of this infill development. And so it's it's worked, I think, really well for us. And then we have some other exceptions for when we inserted twin homes and townhouses. We obviously have to include that we let you go down to 20 feet. And then the minimum width for the applicable zoning district for townhouses. And then we had this issue, and we worked on this probably 4 or 5 years ago. We still have a number of lots in town, like Hidden Lane and some lots off of, I think, Public, that were pre-existing. You know, they were platted that way, but they may have been platted off of an alley. And so we were running into an issue. I think there was a variance that went through the Board of Adjustment, and then it ended up getting appealed to City Council. But we tried to get ahead of the situation by just, you know, inserting this language to say that, you know, if you have a legal lot of record that has been approved by the City Council prior to the adoption of the zoning, or this zoning code, so that, you know, our latest one, which does not abut a public street right away, it shall be accepted from this requirement as long as it has sufficient legal access. So we've got public right of way, private access, easement, or other legal means, just so they have, you know, safe access for fire truck, emergency services, you know, and have required off-street parking. And so we kind of solved, you know, a number of those when we inserted that subsection 4 there. And so this is, you know, in town, kind of an example of what we get for flagpole lots. And so, you know, you had areas where you had some really large lots that were platted at one point in time, you know, some of these larger homestead lots. And as time went on, they were, you know, you had this giant backyard, and people ended up using the flagpole requirements in order to establish, you know, do a lot division in order to get a lot. And so, you know, these flagpoles are probably pushing 100, you know, they're not anywhere near 150, but they do that, you know, provide access to the, you know, this is 20 feet wide, doesn't exceed 150 feet, and gives you kind of that infill density in town on kind of underutilized backyards in certain areas. And so, you know, that's how it's been utilized in town. You look at some areas, so we have, and it's, you know, a lot of areas in the area city impact, so we have this kind of conglomeration of ag forest, maybe farm ranch, and some suburban residential out here. And you think about, you know, we've had issues in the past with, you know, people wanting to do the same thing but running into the 150-foot requirement. And you have a little bit, you know, it's a kind of a different animal out in the periphery of the city, just because, you know, there's really no, I mean, like we talked about, there's no way to create some our standard fire truck turnaround on any of these lots. You know, it just doesn't make sense within the city. But you get out, you know, area city impact, those properties that are, you know, on the edge of the city, and you start to end up with really large lots that are able to accommodate that, but may not, you know, may have an issue with 150 feet. And this is, you know, prevalent up there on North Polk Extension. You know, a lot of these properties are in the area city impact, and they've already been compromised to a certain extent. I mean, we're never going to get any consistent subdivision out here, street extension, just because of the divisions that have happened. And it's, you know, I mean, there's probably a section line here at one point in time, and then you have just some really long lots that have their frontage, but really no way of doing kind of densification in this area where we really want, you know, some infill development to occur. And but there's no way that, you know, we're going to have a road that, you know, somebody's going to plat a road to get one or two lots out here. It's just not going to make sense to be able to, you know, it's not going to pencil out. And so you look at the 150-foot mark, and it's completely, you know, the scale is just amazing. I mean, and so you start to look at some of these lots, and sorry Kurt's not here because, right, you know, this is right in his backyard. But yeah, I mean, you look at all this area here where you could possibly have another, you know, home site or another lot, but you have the 150-foot requirement, and a lot of that ends up, you know, like this lot right in the middle of the house. You know, there's no way you can meet setbacks when you have the 150-foot restriction. And so we were looking at, you know, kind of solutions in these areas. You know, look at Latah County. They have, they just require, you know, some type of access to the street or a public road, but they allow it through an easement. So if you have, you know, an easement at least 25 feet in width, approved by the Latah County Surveyor, connects to the public road, you're able to be able to divide a lot like that. And so I think that, you know, we wanted to shop this by you to possibly look at doing an amendment just for zones that are more rural in nature, so ag forest, farm ranch, suburban residential, in order to be able to possibly allow, access through an easement and not have the 150-foot restriction. You look at, that's 150 feet, it's plenty of room. All of these would probably meet fire truck turnaround standards, they loop through. And so we don't have an issue with fire truck, access or emergency services access. So, I think that the 150 feet and 20 feet in width makes sense in the city. But in these areas, I think that, the only way we're going to get some, nicer, kind of infill density on some of these unused portions is to, allow some type of access through easements and not restrict it to the 150. So, that's pretty much the gist of the kind of rural access that we think we'd want to, maybe take a look at and figure something out.
So is this just like we're being proactive? Nobody's really wanting to do anything, we're just kind of looking ahead?
Well, it's, we have inquiries over the years, and every once in a while we get one out here, and it's just, something that we've run into in the past. It's nothing on a burner or anything. It's just that we've gotten inquiries in the past, and just trying to get ahead of, figuring something out.
Within the city, the rule you read to us said that if the access were approved by city council, then it's legal, it's grandfathered. What would be the consequences if we expanded that to say that it's approved by the city council or the county, to basically also grandfather in the rule of that the county requires of 25 feet and legal access? Would that create terrible problems for us in 25 years?
Well, we would, right now we don't have, this isn't a requirement, so we would have to, within the area city impact, possibly agree, our agreement, either adopt their requirements. The city council wouldn't be able to approve anything like this without a variance right now. So it'd have to go to the Board of Adjustment. The reference to city council before was that, maybe it was approved when it was platted in the 30s and we didn't have a zoning code. And so that's how we ended up with these lots that all of a sudden don't have access to a public street. At some point in time, they inserted this requirement that they have access to a public street. And it may have been in the 60s, I don't know the exact date, but that's just kind of granting it. Obviously, if the lot was created, city council had to approve it at the time. And so that's why we had, inserted this section, was to, allow those lots to be legal, with this current code. But, I think that the cleanest way would just be to amend that section and just, maybe a subsection 5, and just say that, lots within the ag forest, farm ranch, suburban residential zones, are able to be pretty much provided access via, 25-foot, 20-foot easement. Probably put, something about fire, turnaround in there, just so put people on notice. But I think that'd probably be the cleanest way to do it without, if not, city council, like I said, city council wouldn't be able to just blanket approve, any type of access like that. They would have to get a variance to the Board of Adjustment in order to do this.
So if we did that and the property were annexed, it would be legal access. Yeah, as it were annexed, it would continue to be legal access within the city.
We wouldn't have an issue. Yeah, I think that what we would like to do is, possibly include this when we renegotiate with the county, the area city impact. We'd probably just want to include that within the renegotiation, and that would just be the rule in the area city impact. And so it's consistent with their rule because they allow, those via easements right now. And so I'm sure they wouldn't have any issue with it. And so if we did that and they adopted, what we had, then as these are annexed into the city, they would be legal, they'd be conforming to our regulations. So
Yeah.
that'd be a good thing.
So it's really changing from the idea of a flagpole lot to just including the language of easements and driveways, I guess, basically.
Yeah, I mean, easement, an easement going across another property is almost the same as owning, it's
Right.
different, but
Right.
you have those same legal rights
Well,
going
yeah,
across the property. But yeah, it's
they're
not
pretty common in the
not
county,
specifying
actually.
this,
Yeah.
150-foot maximum and allowing them through, an easement and just, just accommodate these larger properties, so.
A long-term consequence, especially on the area you're describing, is that 25, 30 years from now, we would have a number of long driveways, almost streets, but private streets, not public, in that area, and that may be what's that area is destined for. Since it's already fragmented, we're certainly not going to see the development of subdivisions with public streets.
Yeah.
And private streets have problems, but that may be what we have to settle for there.
Well, I guess one advantage is we wouldn't be paying for the upkeep and then the replacement of it, but I think that in order to limit the number of driveways, I think the county also has some language in there about where possible sharing a driveway. So you look at a lot of these with established driveways, like here, be able to just share that and extend that instead of creating another one. I think that we'd probably want to carry over their language that they already have about, you're required to share a driveway unless unfeasible, some type of feasibility there. Can't, all of a sudden the topography goes up from the current one and you can't reach it, so you have to come in from another side.
I guess the thing I'm worried about is people having these private driveways 30 years from now, wondering why they're private driveways and why the city isn't plowing them and why the city isn't paving
Why there
them
aren't
and so on.
sidewalks, et cetera.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
I can see that.
Is there a limit to the number of parcels that can be served by an easement driveway in the county? Or
Well, in this area, I mean, the lot sizes are such that you're probably not going to be able to do much more than one, possibly two.
yeah.
And a lot of these you'd have to go through a rezone to suburban residential. That's what a lot of the properties have done. Like, this property, mainly off of Pavel Court here, these have kind of done this odd L-shaped configuration in order to be able to get the minimum size property. And they've kind of done that here as well. But these are, area city impact line. I think city limits is right here. But
I was walking a day or so ago along Yeoman's on the other side of town,
yeah,
which is another area where the same thing is happening. And I was a little bit surprised not to see a street sign on the corner of what appeared to be a well-traveled route, but which I guess was a private road, accessing several structures newly under construction.
Yeah, you
I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think of future complications.
Yeah.
Well, if our population really increased and all of a sudden we have this sort of disorderly development pattern within the area of expansion, it becomes problematic, and
Yeah,
then you get leapfrogging and subdivisions out beyond that. So, but that's if climate refugees swarm in here faster than we think. I don't know. I mean, just based on our growth projections, they've been pretty steady for a long time.
So we're not really talking about a change to our ordinance, but the agreement with the county, the language, I'm not saying this properly, but we're not talking about necessarily incorporating their language in our code, but having this, it's spelled out in the agreement that we have with the county for these areas.
I think we do have some ag forest zones here in town, and farm ranch and suburban residential. So I think the idea is just to, include it maybe in a subsection in our code.
Okay.
But spell out suburban residential, ag forest, and farm ranch.
Okay.
Where you're going to have out here anyway. You're going to have those zones. And, you may have a possibility of, one or two of those zones that are still within city limits, but they're right next to the
Okay.
city impact.
And
So I think we do that, and then, that would cover us within the city. And then we would just, put that in the negotiations for the area city impact
Okay.
agreement and do it that way, I think would be the cleanest way to do it.
well, the real concern is to make them legal if they, at some point, do become part of the
Part of
city.
yeah.
And I guess the question is that going to be, probably not AF, perhaps SR 40 years from now?
Unless there's
What are we
cities-
dealing with in 40 years?
I mean, presumably at some point, if city services are extended out there, is when we would start seeing more density, and maybe rezones to R2 or R1. But until city services are extended out there, you're probably going to be left with just what we have, more rezones to suburban residential and kind of larger lot, more rural development,
Right.
which this would accommodate. And then, maybe if some philanthropist decides to extend water and sewer all the way up North Polk, then, at that point in time, I think that we'd start to see kind of more maybe tiny home subdivision out there or something. So.
Alder, again, it looks like a first step in a natural growth progression within the city. If we can tighten the density up and make this land use more accessible for residents, and if we need to amend and change things and make these steps easier, I think the statement was made here about leapfrogging. I mean, the worst thing we could have happen is somebody go out into the county and put housing development in there and we missed this opportunity that right now it's not in the city limits, but where's it gonna be in 10 years or 12 years? We've already got this in place. It just looks to me like the approach that staff is taking makes
Yeah.
pretty good sense.
We had some proposals for substantial leapfrogging about 10 years ago.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm new to that, but I remember that, yeah.
Do you know how frequently we actually have annexations into the city? And
Yeah, we usually have about one a year.
Oh, okay.
I'd say it's about
and it's a
average.
lot by lot kind of.
It's usually a lot by lot. It's usually if they're we have a lot of or we have a handful of large properties that are owned by one kind of family.
Okay.
So there's kind of
Right.
swaths like Trail Family, Kenworthy,
Right.
and they have a tendency not to necessarily annex the giant piece, but just portions of it. And so the last couple years, we've had Logos is 30 acres, I think was the most recent. or maybe Montgomery's up on Warbonnet. We had the small piece up there. They put the rest in a conservation easement, but ended up, dividing off the motor business section. We annexed that. There's an annexation for Ridgeview Second Edition off Troy Highway there to the east. I think that those were probably we're probably less than one a year. We're probably maybe one every 2 years type, if you look at the a period of time. And so it's not anything, I mean, we're not like Meridian or Tampa or
Or Sandpoint even, they just took it,
yeah.
it's
Or
quadrupled.
Pullman even. I mean,
Yeah.
I think reading about Pullman, they're always seem like they're annexing hundreds of acres. Somebody's got a 100 acre development that they're wanting to subdivide. So
Yeah, and that's partly because Whitman County has such really pretty heavy restrictions on development outside the city limits anyway, so, yeah.
so does this look like some?
Yeah.
All right
Yeah.
to proceed.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so. Do you need a motion, or are we just?
No, I don't think so. I
Okay.
think, yeah.
All right. So item number 8, expiration of certain land use actions.
Okay. So this is pertaining to a lot of, of our mainly variances, conditional and special use permits. They reside in Chapter 8, and so that really that's the chapter that covers all of these mainly quasi-judicial procedures. And within each section, so variances, conditional or special uses, we go through all these subsections and kind of lay out how they're to proceed. So we've got procedures, and then we define what the relevant criteria and standards are for each action, require a reason statement in writing, so we state that, kind of give parameters on what you're able to do as far as conditions of approval. And these are all actions that would go to the Board of Adjustment. No precedent or transfer, so approval of a conditional use permit in one location doesn't set a precedence that it needs to be approved somewhere else. Can't transfer from one property to the other. The final decision needs to be pretty much when the relevant criteria and standards document is signed. Compliance, need to abide by what was portrayed in the public hearing and the application submittal. Revocations is really the section we're talking about. And so we have I guess first of all, we need to eliminate special uses. So remember with our use table, since special uses and conditional uses were essentially the same, they had the same relevant criteria and standards, the whole bit, we decided just to go to conditional uses and keep it simple. And so we just need to go in and eliminate that entire section, and that's one thing. And that'll be easy. But the revocation section, we have this statement in here that if a building permit and or certificate of occupancy permit pertaining to the conditional use permit is not obtained for the subject property of the conditional use permit within 1 year of the board's final decision, then the conditional use permit is going to be immediately revoked and shall be automatically null and void. And then if it, further states that if it ceases for, 12 consecutive months, then it's also going to be null and void. So, the issue we've run into here in the past is that a lot of times with these conditional use, and it depends on what conditional use it is, but you may have a large school or a church that are going to get a conditional use approval, but they need to know that they're going to get approval and can be located there prior to fundraising and submitting, getting contractors and engineers and architects lined up in order to, put construction plans together. And so, usually that process takes maybe a year, if not more, if you're dealing with one of these entities, because they almost always have a board, and everything has to be, they have to have public meetings, it has to be approved, they have to come up with the funding. And so we see this kind of time and time again with these larger institutional uses that have conditional uses, and some could be residential use. I mean, I know that ever since I've been here, there's been churches that have been approved, and they just haven't been able to raise the money, and they're well beyond the year. Maybe they're 5-6 years out, and so it's pretty clear that their use is expired and they need to come back. And a lot of them are fine with coming back, but you're coming back through the process and having to pay the fee again. And the whole intent behind this is, if things are changing that fast, that all of a sudden you have things that are built up around, then it should expire and you need to review that. But in Moscow, with our relatively low growth rate, things don't change fast enough in order to be able to have different circumstances that would warrant going back through the process. And so it's just been history with running into issues with this expiration. And so we wanted to take a look at extending that out, or
Is there a
or
renewal process, or like an automatic?
or
renewal?
offering an extension,
Mhm.
some type of process like that. So I just went around and looked, kind of dug up a handful of examples of other jurisdictions. Always take a look at what Boise has, and so they have procedures. Term of approval shall not exceed 2 years, and then they part of the issue is you have some phasing of some plans too. I mean, some projects are so large that they have phasing. This kind of pigeonholes you just because they have to have a certificate of occupancy. Well, you may have a project that first phase is they're putting in the roads and the infrastructure. They're not going to pull a building permit for that. It's going to be some other type of site engineering permit. And so if you look at the strict letter of the way the code's written, this building permit or certificate of occupancy is after the project's been completed. That's the final, you can occupy the space. So that's, we really run into issue with the building permit. Looking at Boise, they go through, they allow you 2 years for the approval, and then they have a few different ways that you can vest, your approval. So, acquiring construction permits and commence placement of permanent footings and structures. Structures include sewer lines, water lines, so putting in that infrastructure. Commence the use, so maybe it's a use that doesn't require any structures, and that'd be an issue. We wouldn't issue a building permit for that, and so when it'd be a question of when they vest the use. And then for conceptual conditional use permits, so we don't have conceptual conditional use permits. I'm not exactly sure what that is. Submitted an application for a detailed conditional use permit. So maybe it's some low-level review of
Would it
a
be
project.
an initial preliminary design?
It could be
Yeah,
like a
school
yeah.
site plan or something, and then
And
they
not really a whole lot of detail.
Yeah.
It could be something like that. So you don't put a whole bunch of money into it, not and find out that it's you're not going to be able to do it. No chance to do it. And then for projects require plating, recording the subdivision plat, we usually don't have any ones like that. Commission may set a term within the project, must be completed, term should not be less than 6 years. So, that refers to commission, and so it'd be the Board of Adjustment that would review these, and so I think they may have some commission that reviews theirs, but it'd be the equivalent of the Board of Adjustment. And so, I think that they don't specifically say phasing, but I think we'd want to specify that, you could go through this phasing. So if you had, the first 2 years was infrastructure, the next year was building the church or, government office or, whatever it is, that you could do that kind of in this phasing plan, and you wouldn't have to, that would be acceptable to vest the conditional use. And then they allow another section on extension of the approval term. So, commission may grant up to 2-year time extension for an unexpired conditional use permit. And so before it expires, have to come and say they, request an extension. And that goes along with any variances. So that's probably a good thing to say because, maybe there might be a variance associated with a conditional use permit that we run concurrently. And then the commission shall hold a public hearing to decide the extension request if there's a few different things. So, these are kind of the issues that we'd be concerned with. Significant amendments to the comp plan or zoning ordinance have been, adopted in the interim since it was approved. Significant land use changes in the vicinity that adversely impact the project, or is a hazardous situation which has developed that has been discovered in the area. So, those are kind of things that you would, initially why we had the 1 year is, those things may change, but given our, like I said, given how slow, a lot of things move around here as far as development, and that, it's just a little onerous to have it as a year. And then just stating that has to abide by public meeting law. Coeur d'Alene has,
2 years?
let's see,
For 2 years?
for 2 years. And then the period of time may be extended by the Planning Commission for 1 year without public notice upon written request filed at a time before the permit is expired upon showing unusual hardship not caused by the owner applicant. I don't think we put that in there. It'd probably just be, maybe a hybrid of Boise's, I think, offer an 2-year extension as long as those things haven't changed, but, leave it up to the board to decide. Meridian, so 2 years is what they have. Have to pretty much, commence based upon what was approved. It's required a plat, it's 2 years. And then upon written request, so this is the kind of the extension, can have a 2-year extension. So it's kind of a common theme, 2-year approval, 2-year extension.
Because what happens if you run into a recession in the middle of it or something? I guess,
Yeah,
that would be an example.
I mean, if you got approval in 2008, it may not be till
Right.
2014
Right.
until but Meridian. Take a look at Meridian. That was, I guess, the second half of Meridians. So this is the extension. And then it has similar conditions as Boise. So, there can't be significant amendments to the comp plan or the code that have been changed. So they probably copied what Boise had. Significant changes in land use have occurred in the area, hazardous conditions, so pretty much. And then community facilities and services are no longer adequate to serve the project, so they tacked on one at the very end there. And then the commission may place additional requirements. So kind of a common theme between at least those. Lewiston still looks like they're at 1 year, and they tie it to the building permit still, but they do have a couple different options there instead of just strictly the building permit, but they do allow the extension by the director for 6 months. As long as there's some, the similar conditions about the comp plan, zoning code, applicants show progress, and then the, circumstances are beyond the applicant's control, I guess. So that's what, I think we propose to do is take a look at maybe lengthening that to 2, maybe 3 years, probably 2, and then just add a section about being able to extend that, the board being able to extend it, or maybe staff being able to extend it a year, and then anything longer at the board. So,
would there, does anybody have multiple extensions, and would there be an ability to, because I'm thinking an extension for 2 years, and given some of the things you're describing about recessions and development challenges like fundraising, is there a real downside to having the ability to have an extension beyond the two years?
well, maybe we do, staff's able to grant an extension, and then anything beyond that, they have to go back to the Board of Adjustment and state their case, why they, how much more time, and maybe leave it open-ended.
Rather than
to
having
make
to go
them
through
make
the- yeah.
allow the board to make the decision.
Yeah.
So maybe we do, craft it in that fashion.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
I'd sure like to have the verbiage in there, the caveat about the changes in the land use or change, and make sure that that's addressed.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
really the concern. is,
Yeah.
So that
you
would
know,
be after
Yeah.
the 3 years, if
Yeah.
it comes back, that's when we would address it.
And if things have changed, a new process has to be instigated to address those changes. So
Yeah.
I really think it needs to be addressed in whatever length or extension was put in.
The 1 year has always been something that's really bothered me. Knowing how long it takes institutions, especially to get things in gear. 1 year is unreasonable, and I'd like to see more flexibility and some possibility for extension. I guess I'm willing and to give some responsibility to staff in terms of
Well, staff-
either granting it or deciding whether things have changed to the point
Right.
of further required public input.
Right, because staff would know what's happening around in the surrounding areas. That just-
But the 1 year has always bothered me.
So we don't need a motion, but we'll just direct you to keep exploring this and come back
Okay,
with
yeah,
future, further development, I
Yeah.
should say.
I've seen an awful lot of approvals of various things that have come to naught, and we see them again.
Yeah, and it wastes a lot of people's time and
Yeah.
et cetera to re-review them. So, in terms of, I think that's all of our agenda items. In terms of follow-up, I'm still in the process of trying to get follow-up on speakers. Bruce Tolar set up a Dropbox, and I can pass this around, and he gave me some photos. Unfortunately, they're beautiful color photos, and I couldn't download them. I just had to print them. I don't know if he just didn't give me access to download them or something. But you can see, there's one house in there that's 294 square feet, so it's definitely small. It's like, okay, how did you really do this? But anyway, it turns out, I'm in email contact with him, and I haven't heard back, but after this drop, but it turns out he has a business associate or partner, Ross Chapin, who is based in Portland. And I don't know if Bruce comes out to Portland frequently and we could tag into getting him over here, or whether his partner, it looked like from exploring his partner's website, he also does presentations to groups, etc. I asked him what he charges, and I don't know yet. But I'm sure we'd have to cobble together resources from multiple places to be able to bring somebody in like that. Just thinking about airfare and hotels, you're already over our budget, so unless maybe not from Portland, maybe you can get a good cheap. But anyway, so I don't know. I was wondering, Mike, what other sources of funding there might be out there if we.
Well, we have, like I think I mentioned last time, that we're trying to put together a small mini conference for Idaho APA, just our regions
Right.
1 and 2, and we have, in each region, we have about 500, so we have about $1,000 between the two regions in order to help put this conference on. And so, I think that if he was willing to come maybe sometime in June and tie it into our, day-long
June, as in this year or next year?
this year.
This year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or next year, if we're thinking about next year,
Is the conference not
usually we have
geographic?
it every year.
Oh, okay.
It would just depend on, usually it would rotate. So I think that this year we're trying to have it down here, but next year it'd probably go back to somewhere in like Coeur d'Alene or Post Falls, which would still be doable, to drive to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But, that would be the option. We'd have, a little bit of money there.
And what's the name of the conference?
It's just the spring, we call it the spring mini conference, but it'll just be, Regions 1 and 2 of Idaho chapter of the American Planning Association,
Okay.
Mini conference.
So that's different than the Priest Lake, which is inland
Yeah, that's Inland Empire section.
Inland Empire, yeah. It seems like the professional audience would also be interested probably in something like this if it's. Yeah, I was fascinated. I mean, he was a wealth of knowledge. I really enjoyed walking around, just having put together multiple projects, and I would imagine his partner is probably similarly versed. But
I think it'd probably be best just to get a ballpark
that's
about
what
how
I'm
much,
working on,
what we're talking about, and then
Yeah.
see if it's astronomical. Then we know that we have to look at doing something else. But
do you have the dates in June?
we haven't established those yet.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, as soon as we have that nailed down, I'll send out the information.
Okay. Anyway, there were many photographs, and I just printed a couple of them I was hoping I could download them, but it just didn't. I don't know, is there a way you put a block on Dropbox to keep people from downloading things, or did I just I'm probably technically not proficient. I mean, usually I can download stuff, but I couldn't seem to do it. It kept going to a web page. And
I've noticed it seems more finicky than most programs.
Yeah.
Sometimes it works for me and sometimes it doesn't.
What impressed me was I think there were right now 44 units in place, and it just didn't. The density is there, but it just feels really comfortable. The space just is really.
What city is this in?
This is in Ocean Springs, Mississippi. I just happened to be driving through, and it started as it was a trailer park that got redeveloped after Katrina, starting with mini homes from Katrina that they, these little emergency so that really small house is probably one of the Katrina cottage plans, and then expanding the development to meet different. It's a mixed-use development. There's some of the houses that are actually used as for business purposes, but it's they started going with 2 stories as well for.
So is that like an expansion? Start off with 1 story, and then some people are
and then he kept
expanding to 2.
developing, and he mixed them all together, and he's about to acquire the land next to where this trailer park was and keep going with it. And it's all, it's plotted within the city. It had a really high acceptability from people because of its street presence, and its, I guess, it was a major improvement from what was there before, but people realized that affordable housing was needed, so.
Yeah, the photos, you get the impression, at least looking at those, it's almost a miniature version of, and I don't remember the name of the area, but it's north of Boise, and it's a real
Yes,
dense,
I know where you mean. It's a new urbanist community.
Yeah, and that's considerably
Right.
more upscale, but this almost has the look or a feel of a miniature version of something like that, and they're really attractive.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been to the place you're talking about, and on my way back to Moscow one time I diverted and went up there. I'm trying to remember the name of that place.
I forgot.
But yeah, it has the sense of a new urbanist kind of development, the way it's. So anyway, so I'll keep trying to get push them on an estimate, etc., and find out more details. So we never picked any. I don't think we have any proposals for shared reading, but we might want to think of some topics to look for articles. Or there's still some out there that we haven't covered.
I think we're clean slate.
Okay, we're caught up. Yeah, that's what I thought. So, all right. Meeting adjourned.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.